want all the information that I entered into Facebook and into various apps with businesses that are governed by these laws. But it's quite another to say, and I want all of the background information that all of the other entities that have used their information have developed, and I want all of the derived data that is a complex behavioral map of who I am, but that has nothing inherently obvious to do with the data that I've put in. So you can ask for the data that you've input, but the tricky part is that it's almost impossible to know and much harder to ask for the data that have been developed from that, and yet those data are the ones that can be used to track you, to predict what you're going to be doing, to offer you up adverts, and then to nudge your behavior. So the way that it works is that online entities will gather your information, and that information will be aggregated and used to create a profile about you. A profile that gives a pretty good idea of what you buy, how and when you buy it, and there are some dependencies that have to do with the type of product. Some things people tend to buy locally, some things people tend to buy online. And I mention this because what happens with your next click when you're surfing the internet is that it is auctioned off, and it is auctioned off in real time by highly sophisticated bots to possible advertisers based on your buying proclivities, based on who you are and what you like to buy and what you like to look at, but also based on where the advertisers are located and what your buying patterns are. So the value of your next click, prorated by how much you spend, how likely you are to purchase, what kinds of things you purchase, and what kinds of things are purchased locally and remotely, is auctioned off to advertisers in real time. And there's a documentary called You're Soaking in It from 2017 that talks about this. There's also an ecosystem of these online entities that is put together by online marketing associations. And the number of entities that aggregate and put together this information was on the small side back in 2008, 9, 10. It was in the 100 to 200 range. Now it's in the 7,000 range. So if you look at a graphic of all of these companies, and there are many, many subspecialties, it's become a very nuanced, very, very complex, really, ecosystem of information trading. It's daunting, and it's kind of interesting if we consider the idea that back in the paper era, let's say the end of the 2000s, when most information was still kept on paper, or at least most information that we knew was being used was being shared on paper, you could probably ask most people what information about them was out there and what companies had it, and they could probably give you a pretty good answer for almost all of it. Nowadays, with these thousands and thousands of companies sharing the information, aggregating it, processing it, and turning it into something completely new, it is literally impossible for most humans, I think for all humans, to follow even a tiny percentage of the entities that have their information. So the effective reality is that our control over our information is very much dependent on what agreements exist with these entities, and we have no real understanding of what those agreements are. So effectively what has happened is that all of our personal information that we have put online and that we have shared has essentially flowed away from us and into places that we can't see or really conceptually understand, because there are so many companies dealing with it at one time, and because there are so many companies developing secondary information products from it. And those secondary information products, of course, are really useful for advertising. What it is actually a very large information gathering and processing machine for delivering targeted advertising, but for any other commercial purpose as well that any company can think of. So advertising is a clear and obvious one, but there is any number of other possibilities. Okay. Well, that's at the heart of privacy. Personal information and personally identifiable information, those are the things that privacy laws protect. And that's really the asset that defines privacy. It is defined as information about an identifiable individual or identifiable information, again, about a particular individual. And effectively, what we're talking about is any information that you can connect to an individual. There are many obvious examples. An individual's age, an individual's sex, gender, an individual's height, their social insurance number, their student number, the amount of money in their bank account or library card number. But it gets much subtler, because suppose that you have a smartphone or a Fitbit that is capturing detailed information about what an individual has been doing. So the individual has been wearing their Fitbit, they went for a run, they went to school, they moved a certain amount, and they were sitting at a lecture, they ran to another lecture, they went home, they went to sleep, they woke up at 3 in the morning and there was a 1.5 hour period of intense activity, then they went to sleep again. All of this is captured in their Fitbit, and of course, the people who process that information, or more accurately, the bots who process that information and the programs and the software that process that information, will have abstracted a behavioral profile that is probably much better and much more able to not only depict what that individual has done, but to predict what that individual will do in the future than what that individual can do, him or herself. And the beauty of this, and in a sense the ugliness of it, but from the perspective of businesses that want your personal information, the absolute opportunity here is that people are less good at predicting what they do than AI and algorithms that have access to a lot of behavioral information are. So effectively, the entities that hold your personal information are able to use that information to understand you better than you understand yourself, and to know what your next moves and actions will be better than you do. I'm not saying that it's absolutely predictive. It's all heuristic and it's all probabilistic, but their ability to predict will outscore your ability to predict what you will do next. And that's something that is happening right now. So personal information, to recap, is all information about an identifiable individual. It has been defined in privacy laws, and it seems simple because you'd think it's what I enter into my phone. It's information that I provide to an entity like a university or a bank or a company when I sign up for an app, and I put in various different things. I put in my email, my name, maybe my address, my telephone number, so they have that. Well, guess what? Once you have hit I agree on that app, or once you've started using all of those associated products like the Fitbit, and for that matter, your online activities, everything about those activities, including the number of microseconds between clicks of letters, your particular pattern of spelling errors, and yes, all of that good stuff that the Fitbit has captured as well. All of that is used to create a behavioral profile about you, which itself is personal information about you, but which is beyond your control because A, you don't know that it exists, B, nobody practically may be able to figure out exactly where it is because it has now been handed off as though it were the baton in a relay race among we don't know how many entities. So we don't know where it is, we don't know exactly what it contains, but we do know for a relative certainty that it's out there and it can be used to predict what you will do very, very well. Okay, so we're talking about privacy, and I'd like to distinguish among three key areas. One is the nation-state arena, which has to do with national security, which has to do with the kinds of interests that Snowden talks about. Another is the public sector, which is regulated in particular ways, and I will idiosyncratically talk about the public sector in Canada and in Ontario in particular. And then there's the commercial sector, which is regulated a little bit differently. All of these things are evolving, obviously, and what we say and what we know today may be very different tomorrow or in a few years. But for the moment, in the nation-state context, there is the expectation that certain entities, the United States in particular, but I think realistically all other major powers, to the extent that they technically can, capture all the information they can. And in the context of the United States, at least according to Edward Snowden, that means all electronic communications. Now, some of those are encrypted. There's a belief that many of the major IT companies have worked with the American government. Again, this is not entirely knowable. This comes largely from Edward Snowden's comments and allegations. But if we believe that, then we come to understand that all communications have been captured. All records of where mobile devices have gone that are available among the Five Eyes have been captured and are available for some kind of processing depending on the need, the importance, and their findability in the mountain of data. But the data are, to the extent that they can be, obviously being indexed and looked through. When I say looked through, I mean technically, I mean by machines, obviously not by humans. But there is targeted use of that information, again, according to Snowden.